In Deuteronomy, it's the dawning of a new age, a golden age of health and prosperity. The land lies before them, the promised land that is to be their home. People of Israel survived 40 years in the wilderness, and now the time has come to prepare themselves at last for their new life. Before they crossed the river Jordan, Moses reminds them of how they came to this point. He retells the story of their exodus from slavery to Egypt, slavery in Egypt, and all that has happened since then. Central to that story is the relationship between God and the Israelites. Moses reminds them all that God has done and all that God requires of them to do. During the wilderness years, God has been building his relationship with his people, instructing, leading, blessing, and often rebuking them. In the verses which came just before our reading from Deuteronomy, Moses reminds the Israelites of the 40 years wandering through the wilderness. And then, as we heard, Moses goes on to describe the wonderful land God has given them. Great hope now is that God's people will live a good life without fear and anxiety, because God will protect and bless them as they live according to his word. And then in Luke, the rich man in the story Jesus tells has certainly prospered. He's been in a promised land of plenty. He owns so many things, and his fields produce so much grain that he just can't find room to store it all. His solution is to carry out extensive building work so he can pack everything in, sit back and enjoy it. Relax, eat, drink and be merry. You fool, thunders God, as an echo of what Moses was saying in Deuteronomy. You may say to yourself, my power and the strength of my hands have produced this wealth for me. But he had forgotten as well who his wealth came from. He's so full of his own importance and power, he's forgotten God's commandments. The most important commandments: you should love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and strength, and love your neighbour as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law. The rich man had forgotten, and he had no thought of his neighbours. No consideration for his servants who worked long hours, with no other benefits. Or the hungry woman and her children in the nearby village who had lost their husband and father, on whom they depended. Or the orphans who had been sold to him as slaves because they had no other relatives. So that rich man was foolish and guilty, not because he's rich, but because he's lost sight of the things of God's eternal life, things that are far more important than status, power, and wealth in this world. And it reminds me of a time in Uganda when I went, not of a rich man, I went with a friend to the place where he had been brought up, and he showed me the family land, and then as we were leaving, he just saw his neighbour. So greeted them, and his neighbour invited us in, and as is customary, if you invite someone in, then you offer something to eat or drink. I can't remember what that was. But then, as we were leaving, this family had no idea that we were turning up. But as we were leaving, they gave me a huge bag of produce, massive, and I was so grateful I didn't quite know what I was going to do with it. But, you know, just that generosity of a stranger, a friend of someone they knew, becoming a friend, but nonetheless a stranger. And that generosity on that first time, it just blew me away. This family who just had a very small mud hut on a very small piece of land. We use the term subsistence farmer. You know, most are, you know, it's hardly subsistence. You know, they hardly manage to get enough for themselves. Certainly, you know, the idea of having enough to pay school fees for their children, that's a long way off. And yet, that generosity. So, there are many ways that we are so privileged in this country. You know, we're so much better off than someone like that. That's not to say, you know, we all know that people are really suffering at the moment, and some people actually maybe aren't in reality that much better off than that family in Uganda. But many of us do have a lot to be thankful for. And when we look around this country, we have a democratically elected government, elected in fair elections, far from perfect, but we get what we vote for. We have a national health service and education, free for all, free access, no going to a hospital and can you pay for this or not? We have civil order and largely a tolerant society. Yes, we do have problems, but it's not as if we have any kind of, you know, the government doesn't try to attack people based on race, colour, creed. And there are many times when actually our cultural differences are enjoyed and celebrated. So we're called to live our own lives with integrity. And all that we need will also be given to us. Don't worry, says Jesus. God knows what you need and he will provide. Some people at the moment would really struggle with that in this country. But we know that God does provide everything that we need. Not everything that we want, but everything that we need. So what about people who suffer starvation, disease, failed harvest, wars, natural disasters? Where is God's provision for them? Well, often it's here among us. Often we have more than we need. What will we do with that wealth? We take up the responsibility wealth brings and give to our neighbours in need. Something of what we're doing here, but more than that. What about those who feel lonely and isolated? What about those addicted to drugs or alcohol? What about those suffering severe mental distress? Often they suffer rejection by society on top of the agonising pain and distress. Where is God's provision for them? Maybe we have an opportunity to serve, to help one or two. We can live generous lives helping those around us and those overseas. Gerard's going to show some videos about these next week, but as well as supporting those in this country by things like opening up the church as a warm place, ourselves giving. We have got the opportunity to give overseas, and the free tier fund Operation Agri and BMS will be charity